We're going to show you how to put the long travel lift kit on a RXV. The first step you got to do is to jack the car up. You want to put the frame on jack stands and remove your wheels and tires. Then with a 15 millimeter wrench, you want to remove the bolts that are holding the stock bumper to the car and remove the bumper. Now we got to remove the hubs from the spindle. You need to remove the dust cap first, and then using a 24 metric, you want to remove the lock nut that's holding the hub to the spindle, and then remove the hub from the car. Now we're going to remove the tie rods from the spindles. You want to back the jam nut off, and you want to remove the cotter pin from the bottom of the tie rod end, and then with a 17 millimeter wrench, remove the nut that's holding the tie rod end to the spindle. And then using a tie rod lifter, or what they call a pickle fork, it'll allow you to lift the tie rod out. You want to keep these bolts for reinstallation. Now that we got the tie rods off of the other side of the car, using two 15 millimeter wrenches, remove the top stock shock mount. Now we're going to the other side of the car and we're removing the top stock shock bolts. Now that you can drop the top shock using two 15 wrenches,
drop A on.
You're going to remove the whole A-arm strut assembly. Save these bolts for reinstallation and do both driver and passenger side. Now, using a number 8 Allen wrench and a 17 metric, you want to remove the bolt that is attaching the steering to the steering rack.
Bottom bolt.
Using the same wrench, take out the bottom bolt.
There's no metal.
Now you need to remove the 3 bolts that are holding the steering rack to the car, and you use a T45 Torx. Once you have these off, you're going to remove the rack from the car. Now that the steering box is off the car, you want to remove the stock steering U-joint from the rack. The next step we're going to do is we're going to install the steering box to the subframe using the supplied M10 by 40 flange bolts and M10 nylocks.
And the bottom one.
You can see we got 3 bolts,
3 nylocks.
and we are looking at it from the front of the subframe. And you want to securely tighten this. Now we're going to loosely install the subframe to the car using the supplied 5/8 by 1.5 bolt and lock nut. Do not securely tighten at this time. Now we're going to loosely install the back of the subframe to the square tubing of the car using the supplied 3/8 U-bolts, washers, and lock nuts. Do not securely tighten at this time. Make sure you do the driver and passenger side. Now we're going to install the driver's side top A-arm to the car, and they are side specific. Make sure the flat side goes to the front of the car and the taper goes to the rear. And you're going to loosely install this to the stock top A-arm location using the stock bolts. Loosely install at this time. Make sure the washer goes in between.
Between the bushing.
As shown.
I don't know where it is, Steve.
What we want to show you when you're putting the top A-arms in is that the supplied washer on the front goes to the back side of the A-arm, and then it goes to the front side of the A-arm on the back mount. Now, using the stock existing bolt from the back side, loosely install the back mount to the car as shown. Once you have this done on the driver's side, perform the same steps, and don't forget to put your washers in on the passenger side. Now that you have the A-arm started on both the driver and passenger side, you want to securely tighten them using two 15mm wrenches. Securely tighten all 4 bolts. The next step, using a 9/16 wrench or ratchet, securely tighten both U-bolts evenly to the frame. Now, using a 15/16 ratchet and wrench, securely tighten the subframe to the car as shown. Now we're going to install the driver's side bottom A-arm with the flat side to the front and the tapered side to the rear. Loosely install it to the subframe using the supplied 3/8 by 3 bolts and lock nuts. Loosely install it this time, and then loosely install the passenger side also.
We made these heavy, but we don't need them.
Now we're going to install the spindles to the A-arms using the 1/2 by 8 bolt, 2 Heim spacers with the flat end going up. The taper goes to the Heim as shown. Another Heim spacer on the bottom with the taper to the Heim. And then the 1/2-inch lock nut. Now the spindles are side specific. As you can see, the steering arm goes to the back of the car, and the axle on the spindle body is towards the bottom of the body. This is the passenger side you're looking at. Now we're going to show you how to center the steering. You're going to push in on the steering box, and as you can see, we have the spline marked. It's hard to see on here, but we put a mark with a silver Sharpie.
Pointing forward.
Now it's pointing forward, so there's approximately 3 turns, full turns, in the complete rack. We're going to pull out on the steering box 1.5 rotations. There's 1, and there's 1/2. Now our marker is pointed to the back, and you want to loosely install the tie rod end to the steering arm on the spindle. Now, using the stock nut and cotter pin, you want to securely install the tie rod end to the steering arm. This is just the driver's side right now. We're getting ready to do the passenger side. Now we're going to work on the passenger side. You need to remove the stock tie rod end, and then the supplied tie rod spacer or extension.
Screw it on.
Thread it on to the steering box as shown. Notice we left the jam nut, the stock jam nut, on the inside, and we're supplying you with an extra jam nut which you'll need for the extension. Now you want to put the supplied jam nut on the end like shown, and put your tie rod end onto the extension. Now that you have the tie rod extension on, you want to go ahead and install the tie rod end to the steering arm as shown, and securely tighten everything at this time. You got your spindle bolt, your spindle nut, and the passenger side of the spindle is done. Okay, now using the stock universal and the stock pinch bolt, take the supplied steering extension. There's only one way it can go in. Slide it into the stock universal, and then you want to put it on to the spline of the steering box.
That's it right there.
Now you want to make sure the steering wheel is straight, and slide the steering shaft into the steering extension and bolt together with the supplied, what are they, quarter by
1.25.
by 1.5,
Grade 8 bolts.
and securely tighten. Now you want to turn the steering wheel to expose the pinch bolt location. Install the stock pinch bolt to the bottom of the extension as shown, and then securely tighten the stock Allen bolt to the top of the extension as shown. Make sure all these bolts are securely tightened. Now we're going to install the shock mounts to the car. They are side specific. We're working on the passenger side. The tab on the bottom goes towards the back. Alright, now we're going to install it with the supplied 3/8 by 1 to the stock hole in the frame. There's 2 holes here. You're going to install it to this top hole, and then the bottom hole on the shock tower with the supplied 3/8 by 1. And then from the back side, you're going to use the stock top shock bolt. It's going to go into the stock location. As you can see, the shock mount goes to the outside of the frame. Once you have this in place, securely tighten. Do the same for the driver's side. Once you have everything in place, securely tighten using 9/16 ratchets or wrenches. Start at the bottom and work out. What I want you to notice is that we supply 1 lock nut. The top bolt uses a lock nut, not a nylock. The bottom 2 use nylocks. Now we're going to install the shocks to the lift kit. As you can see, there's 3 holes for shock mounting. The inner hole is the softest ride, middle hole is a medium ride, and the top hole would be a stiffer ride. Using the supplied 7/16 by 2 1/4, shock to the back side of the plate, washer on the back side of the shock and lock nut. You want to install the shock to the top shock plate. Now we're going to mount the bottom of the shock using the supplied 7/16 by 5 1/2 and both shock spacers with the flat side to both the front and back side of the shock, and 7/16 lock nut. Securely install the bottom of the shock to the bottom A-arm. You want to do this to both the driver and passenger side. Now we're going to show you how to set the toe. When the adjustment is done properly, it should be 1/4 to 1/8 narrower in the front portion of the tires than the rear portion of the front tires. So what you want to do is take a tape measure and measure from wheel to wheel in the front portion of the tires, and then get your number and then go to the same location in the rear portion of the front tires. And then you're going to make your adjustments on your tie rods. You got a tie rod on the driver's side and the passenger side. He's breaking loose the jam nut. And once the jam nuts are loose, you can either lengthen the tie rod or shorten the tie rod, which will tow the car in or tow it out, and you can do it to both the driver and passenger side until you get the desired front end alignment you're looking for. Yep, and just remember to retighten your jam nuts when you're done. If you want to adjust your camber, just take the spindles back off the car, take the bolt out, loosen your jam nut, and then you can thread these in or thread them out, which will push the tire out at the top or bring it in at the top, and you can do this to both the top and bottom, so you can get any kind of alignment you're looking for. It's fully adjustable. The next step, you have to trim the front bumper to clear the A-arms, and we send along a template. As you can see, we got this one marked with a silver Sharpie of where you're going to be cutting it. Then you just flip the template and mark the other side, and then you can cut with a Sawzall, bandsaw, or jigsaw. Now that you have the bumper cut, you want to install it to the stock bumper bolts with the stock nuts as shown. Now that the front lift is assembled, you want to double check that all bolts and nuts are securely tightened, the jam nuts are securely tightened, and you reinstalled all the cotter pins. Now we're going to install the rear lift. You want to jack the car up, place the frame on jack stands, and then with a rear car jack, place underneath the rear skid plate or the rear differential, and remove the wheels and tires from the car. On gas models, you need to remove the cotter pin from the brake cables and remove the brake cables from the brake cable mounts on both the driver and passenger side of the car. Save the cotter pins for reinstallation. Using a 15mm wrench, unbolt the shock from the stock shock mount on both the driver and passenger side. You want to save the shock bolts for reinstallation. Using a 15mm ratchet or socket, unbolt the nuts that are holding the U-bolt that's bolting the rear end together. Now you want to remove the U-bolt and the U-bolt plate from the car. These will not be reused. Do it from both driver and passenger side. Using 15mm socket and ratchet, unbolt the rear leaf springs from both the back mounts and front mounts, and save the bolts for reinstallation. Once you have the bolts out, remove the leaf springs from the car. Now that we have the leaf springs off the car, using the car jack, you want to lower the rear end and get ready to install your risers. The next step, on the driver side only, we need to remove the brake drum hub, remove the cotter pin, use 1 1/8 inches. Socket, remove the nut. You want to save all this for reinstallation. Remove the hub cover. What we need to do is, with 1/2-inch ratchets, remove the 2 bolts from the front side of the brakes, which is going to allow us to take off the stock driver's side brake cable mount. You want to save these bolts because we're supplying you with a new brake cable mount. Now that we removed the stock brake cable mount, we're going to reinstall the supplied brake cable mount the same way you took it apart, using the stock hardware. Once you have this on and securely tightened, use the stock hardware and reinstall the drum. Don't forget your cotter pin. Alright, the next step is to take your rear riser with the skinnier leg to the rear of the car, put it into place. Now the rear lifts go together the same for a gas and electric, except for an electric cart you don't have to worry about the brake cables because there are no brake cables. Now you want to take the stock leaf springs using the stock hardware, and for right now you just want to loosely install it to both the front and rear mounts until we get everything else into place. Once we get everything into place, we're going to securely tighten. So do this to both the driver and passenger side of the car. To get the center pin of the leaf spring lined up with the hole in the riser. And now take the new supplied driver side shock plate. They are side specific. Make sure the shock mount tab goes towards the back and the inside of the car as shown. I'm showing you the driver's side. And set on the centering pin of the leaf spring. Put the new supplied U-bolt through the shock mount plate and your bottom U-bolt plate. And for now, with the supplied nuts, you want to loosely install this and do the same for the other side. We're not going to securely tighten everything until we get everything into place on both sides. If you have an electric car, you want to securely tighten the rear lift and reinstall the shock mount. If you have a gas car, just snug the rear lift and we are going to move to installing the new front motor mount. You want to take the jack and move it to the front portion of the skid plate near the bolts and slightly lift up to take some of the pressure off the motor mount. Using a 12 millimeter on top and a 15 on the bottom, you want to remove the nut and the bolt that's holding the stock motor mount to the car. Remove the stock spring and gold retainers. The spring will not be reused, but the containers will be reused for the new motor. Using the supplied bolts and new drop-down motor mount, bolt the mount to the stock motor mount location on the frame and securely tighten. Using the supplied rubber spacer, the stock gold retainers and stock washers, and the supplied bolt and nut, you want to bolt the stock motor mount to the new motor mount. You only want to snug this bolt, do not over tighten. Using the stock bolt, install the shock to the new shock mount on both the driver and passenger side. Securely tighten your U-bolts, securely tighten your shock bolt, and securely tighten your front and rear leaf spring bolts. Now that we lifted the car, the stock brake cable on the driver's side is a little short, so we have to reroute it. To do that, you want to remove the battery, and then between the two stock holes that the brake cable lays in, you want to drill another hole, and we're going to reroute our brake cable down through this new hole to give us the extra slack. Once this is done, you want to reinstall the battery. As you can see, we rerouted the brake cable through the new hole. To get it down through there, we actually pulled it forward and then snaked it through underneath. Reinstall the brake cable to the new brake cable mount on the driver's side, and reinstall the brake cable to the brake cable mount on the passenger side. Put your clevis and cotter pin back in, and double check all your bolts are securely tightened, and install your wheels and tires, and they're done.